Even though the garden is winding down for the year, we have lots of preserving to finish before we can officially take a little more time to have a season of rest. During September and October, we hit apple season and we have many bushels of apples to preserve. In winter, having too much of the same thing gets old really fast. So we are preserving these apples 5 different ways, and the first way we are preserving the apples is by making apple cider. Usually apple cider is a 2-step process of crushing the apples and then using a cider press to push out the juice. But since we only do a couple jars of cider a year, it's not really worth it to us to invest in those tools yet. So in the meantime, I use a juicer that I've had. This juicer pretty much does the same thing by crushing the apples raw, then it presses them. We still have to run some of it through a sieve to make sure there's no pulp. But after that, it's ready, and I use my water bath canner to preserve it. It will last for a couple years when it's canned, but of course we are usually consuming it by spring because this stuff is so good. Cam had this idea the other day that we should try and freeze dry some cranberries, and because cranberries are so tart just by themselves, and we would probably be eating these as snacks, I decided it would be good to do what you see in the grocery store with cranberries, and usually they are infused with apple juice or they have sugar mixed in and then they are dried. So I'm going to try that today with our homemade apple cider. I'm going to let these cranberries soak in the apple cider and see if that helps them. So I've got the cranberries weighed out at 3 pounds. I think that'll fit on my freeze dryer trays. I'm using my medium-sized freeze dryer today. And then I'm gonna measure out some of this cider. The kids actually made this for me this morning because we ended up canning all of our cider from the other day. So I'm gonna start with 2 cups. Maybe I won't need all that. I'm not really sure. This is totally an experiment. So we're gonna see if this actually works. I think the most important part of this is just making sure that there's enough liquid that they're all sitting in it to soak. And so I did end up pouring in the full 2 cups. I am going to pivot with this and do something else because I realized as I was stirring that cranberries have a thicker skin, and even after they've been frozen, it would be really hard for the flavoring to get in there. So I'm going to chop these cranberries up a little bit in my food processor and then let them soak. Ideally, I would like these chopped in half, but I am not patient enough to chop each of these individually, nor do I have that kind of time. So the food processor is chopping them not exactly evenly, but it's close enough for me, so we're just gonna go with it. I let these cranberries soak for a little bit in the apple cider, and I taste tested just a little bit, and they are still so tart. So the good thing is that freeze drying does concentrate some of the sweetness and those kind of flavors. So I'm going to do a small amount on the first tray that has no added sweeteners aside from the cranberries and the apple cider. And then after that, I am going to add some sugar in this so that it's actually palatable, and we will freeze dry that and see which one turns out better. I think I was a little bit overly optimistic going into this about what the freeze dryer could do as far as concentrating the flavor that was there, and especially the sweetness, because the result was after these came out, the tray with no added sweetener, it still tasted really quite tart. And the other ones with the added sugar, they were a lot better. So it was definitely good to add different levels of sweetness to each of these trays. So now when I go and make another batch, I know exactly the amount that I need. Another thing you're probably noticing is that the cranberries with the juice, they stick so bad on these freeze dryer trays. I had to kind of scrape them off. Some of the different trays with more sugar, they came off a little bit easier, but I was really wishing that I had the silicone nonstick mats for these freeze dryer trays. I already have some in the extra large size, but because we were considering selling our medium size freeze dryer, I didn't purchase any more. But for now, we decided that we were going to keep the freeze dryer because we use it for little test batches like this. So I did go ahead and order some more of those silicone mats, and they're on their way here. In the meantime, I am probably going to be making another batch of this. And if you don't have those silicone mats, you can use things like parchment paper, which I should have used, but I didn't. So on the next batch, I will use the parchment paper. The next thing I am preserving is some plain applesauce. We have gone through seasons in life where we have preserved a lot of applesauce and gone through all of it. And then as the years went by and my kids got older, they ate less and less. So this last year, now that we have a little toddler in the house again, we went through all of our jars of applesauce so fast, and we had several months where we didn't have any. So this year, I'm making sure that we have enough to last us until next season. For the applesauce, I prepared the apples a little bit differently than I have in years past. Usually, I take the time to use my apple peeler core slicer to take out the cores, get rid of the seeds before they even get heated up, and then put through the sauce maker. But I was actually just reading the manual for my sauce maker, and it said to make applesauce, I don't need to remove the seeds. I can just cut the apples into quarters, heat them up, get them soft, and then the sauce maker would take out the seeds and the skins for me, and it worked great. It saved me a whole bunch of time, so I'll just be doing that from here on out. All the apples that we are using this year come from a local farm. Hopefully at some point we will be able to have our own apple harvest. We did harvest one apple from our entire orchard this year, so that's a step in the right direction. We put a lot of work into the orchard last year because I pretty much neglected it for several years, but now it has fencing and we mulched it several times. So we did get an apple and 2 pears. That was our harvest from our orchard this year. It's still very young. And the other thing that happened this year is late in the season, we went through a really bad drought period, which just barely ended. Actually, yesterday we finally got some rain, a significant amount of rain at least. And hopefully we will come out of this and the trees will do better next year. But I'm really glad we added the mulch because otherwise I'm guessing our trees probably would be dead by now because they went so long without water. Because I am getting my apples from a local farm, I'm pretty much limited to the varieties that they have. And for apple sauce, I like to use Jonathan and Jonna Gold and Fuji. Those are my favorites for the applesauce. And then for the cider, we liked the Fuji, and Arkansas Black is our favorite for the cider thus far based on those varieties that they had. Last year I had some apples in our pantry that were about to go bad, and I also had a ton of cranberries that were in the freezer. So I combined the two and I came up with this cranberry applesauce recipe, and we ended up liking it a lot. So much so that the jars disappeared pretty quickly in the year, and that's usually a good sign that it's something I need to make again. So I made it again this year. I personally like it a lot more than just plain applesauce. The color is prettier, the texture is better, and it has a little more depth of flavor. I'm really excited because we're finally in the home stretch of preserving these apples. And I saved the 2 easiest things for last. I'm going to be making some apple chips in my dehydrator, and then we are also making some freeze-dried apple slices. this is the time when it's really convenient to have the bigger trays because we're lining out the apples in one layer, and so you can't fit too many unless you have the larger trays. So these are the extra large trays. I actually have the silicone mats for these, which is really nice because then the apples won't stick to the bottom. It only sticks bad when you have like a lot of juice that comes out. After we lay them out in this flat layer, then what we're spraying them with is some lemon juice just to keep them from browning so much. It actually doesn't really matter either way, but it helps them look a little bit nicer. It's sour. It's been several months since I used the dehydrator. The last time we used it was for the grapefruit leather. Ever since I got my freeze dryer, I have pretty much used that exclusively, but there are some things I still like to make on the dehydrator trays. One of those is the fruit leather, and the other thing that I really like to make are the apple chips. I like both freeze-dried apples and dehydrated apples. They just have different textures, and I think they both taste really good. They both disappear in our pantry, which, like I said, is a good sign that our family is liking those a lot. So we just make both every single year. Just like the freeze-dried apples, we use the apple peeler core slicer to get these sliced, and then we chop them in half and line them up on the trays. I still spray them with some lemon juice. And with these and some of the freeze-dried ones, we sprinkled them with some cinnamon just because we like that. It just adds a little bit of extra flavor. After the apples are in the dehydrator, I set the temperature at 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and I set the timer for about 12 hours. I'm moving some of these pumpkins away from the dehydrator because it does put off a lot of heat, and I didn't want it to ruin the pumpkins. I also had a little bit of extra time, so decided to make one more batch of the freeze-dried cranberries. This time around, I definitely had a better idea of what was going to work and what wasn't. And one thing I did differently this time is I chopped the cranberries a little bit smaller, just because last time they formed a big sheet anyway, and I broke them up into little bite-sized pieces. So I figured it would be better taste-wise to have those cranberries be a little bit smaller and more infused with the sugars. The other thing that I considered doing with these cranberries is heating them up with the apple cider and the sugar to make more of like a cranberry sauce. But in the end, I decided against that because a lot of the benefit for me of the freeze dryer is that it retains a lot of the nutrition. And if I was cooking these, then it would lose a lot of the nutrition that's there. So I decided to just keep it raw and freeze dry it that way. With all of these dried and freeze-dried fruits, we put them in the mason jars with a lid and then vacuum seal them. I don't put them into Mylar bags or anything long-term because we're usually eating these within a couple of months. Having all the apples preserved and ready to eat makes it really convenient for our family to just go to the pantry and grab a healthy snack. Throughout the winter, we don't have as much fresh food, so it's really nice to just sit back and relax and enjoy all of the fruits of our labor and all of the preserving that we've done this year.